Dave, today is March 29th, 2022, and I mentioned that
although maybe that's just what Big Calendar wants you to think, Brad.
Yeah, they've had a corner on that market for too long.
Big Calendar's not telling me what date it is. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Well, it's significant because today is the 10-year anniversary of the day I left my day job at the Philadelphia Daily News.
Oh,
In
wow.
other words,
is it really?
As of tomorrow, I will have been a full-time professional cartoonist for 10 years.
Brad, that's quite a thing. Congratulations. That's amazing.
I gotta tell you, I really expected to have failed by now. No one is more surprised than me that I've been able to put this thing together and make it work.
Well,
I'll
be honest,
10 years.
I'm pretty surprised. So I don't know if there's nobody that's surprised.
Guaranteed, as surprised as you are, I'm more surprised. I guarantee.
Listen, I'm incredibly impressed and happy for you. I continually am impressed by your work ethic and how hard you strive every day and the work you put in every day. And so there's no one more deserving of 10 years of working professionally as a cartoonist. Congratulations. That's awesome.
I appreciate it, but it's just these are kind of, you got to mark these milestones at this point.
Yeah.
And give yourself a little positive feedback, because it's been one hell of a weird 10 years. I mean, during that time, we've seen the ad model crash.
Oh, and I saw, by the way, I saw you crash with it. You were first were despondent with that when it first started happening.
Because it happened in year one. I left in 2012. Really, the market had already started to recede. It wasn't until 2013 that I really realized what was going on, and there was no coming back.
Yeah,
that was at the very beginning of this thing. So we saw ads take a powder. We saw the rise of crowdfunding and social media in everyday revenue streams. We saw a lot of stuff come down the road in the last 10 years. It's been amazing,
but you did it, my friend. 10 years. That's worth celebrating. That's a big thing. That's fantastic. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to share the opening with today. Is I made it 10 years, and I'm looking forward to the next.
And on that note of congratulations, Brad, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We have a plethora of comics bevy questions to jump in onto today. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody that you could be watching us live on the live stream every week. Right now, you could be watching us at patreon.com/comiclab. There is a live gab level where you can level. That's how a 4-year-old would say it. A live gab level. There's a level where you can watch us every week live stream, and there is a chat happening in real time. And if you happen to miss the show, you can watch the archived version, which is saved every week for you. So join us over at patreon.com/comiclab.
And we'd like to take this moment to remind you that the show is brought to you by our good friends over at Wacom, WACOM.com. They're the makers of the powerful, professional, portable Wacom One. And I'm telling you, like I said at the beginning of the show, this is March, the end of March. That means the weather's warming up, and this is a great time to get your Wacom One and join me out on the back deck. I'm going to be doing a lot of work this summer out in the sunshine, breathing the fresh air. And that Wacom One is going to allow me to do it.
And just a reminder for everyone, spring in the Brad Guigar household means that Wacom One's being taken out on the deck to cartoon delightfully. But Brad makes a big announcement to the house. Daddy's going out with his other children because the crows are out there.
That's right. I've got to go out. I've got to take a renewed effort at making friends with those crows. This is going to be it for me.
Come hell or high water, the Wacom One and Brad's art skills are going to make some friends of crows this season. So we say a huge thank you and a shout out to our friends at Wacom, WACOM.com, for making Brad's weird mania about crows come true while he's able to continue his career.
So Dave, let's start the show with a question from one of our $5 Patreon backers, Oxfordinary, who asks, What are your thoughts on streaming while working on comics? Is it a good way to boost engagement and presence as an online artist, or do you find that it can be distracting and negatively affect your output? Thanks in advance for your advice.
Well, this is a great question. Streaming, by the way, is something that younger me would have been amazed would exist in my cartooning career, because I went into cartooning in part, even though I am an extrovert, Brad, I went into cartooning because I love the art form, but I also loved the potential for anonymity. I don't know if this was you, but for me, I could live a normal life. No one would bother me. No one would know what my face looked like. I was a cartoonist that my work stood out into the world while I could stand back. Whereas all of my actor friends were very much, no matter where they go, they can't eat at a restaurant, they can't check in at a hotel, they can't do anything because they are their art, right? And so I always liked the anonymity of cartooning. But now in this streaming age, just to put some history on it, we've got some performative aspects that have come into cartooning, which did not exist when we were a kid. The only time you had performative cartooning, there would be cameras setting up, and Stan Lee was getting powdered, and John Romita was getting mic'd up, and you know, they'd be, well, now we're gonna do How to Draw Comics the Marvel way, and it was, you know what I mean? Like, you had weeks of lead up, like, here's what we're gonna do, here's how we're gonna draw it, here's the camera angles we're gonna have. Now it's you at your desk with a camera or two and some hopefully good lighting and streaming. And I got to say, I am of mixed attitudes about it, Brad. I both love it and hate it. How about you? What are your attitudes with streaming?
I hate it. It is not a good fit for me. But I will say, I think depending on how you are wired as a person, it could be a very good fit for you. In other words, all these things that Oxfordinary mentions, good for boosting engagement. Absolutely. It's a good Patreon reward. Yep. I see people offering commissions during live streams. So there's lots of ways to monetize a live stream. I know Twitch has gotten very good at adding monetization for people using their platform as well as others. If you are wired in that way, this is a very good value add. The problem is, for me, is I don't like being watched. I just don't. Speaking of my years in newspapers, I did not like it when editors would saunter over and watch me work over my shoulder because they had nothing else better to do. I didn't like lingering people. I didn't like loitering. I didn't like any of it. And the other part is this: like you, I kind of feel I kind of like a pressure to be an entertainer when I'm on, when the camera's on. And what I found was the few times I've done live streams, what happens is I'm much more focused in trying to present an interesting a thought, say things interesting, carry on a conversation. And meanwhile, I am not working on the comic that I'm supposed to be working on. And it slows me down, and it completely makes me lose focus because I feel a pressure to be interesting. And I can't do both at the same time. I can barely draw a comic. I can barely be interesting. God knows I can't do both of those things at the same time.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I feel, is that, so let me talk first about the positives with streaming of what I like. I love the audience outreach. Because I do a podcast, you know that I have enough of a personality where I actually am good with my readers. I'm good with the give and take. I can do it. But because I'm an ambivert, which is a mixture of introverted and extroverted, it does take a charge off of my social battery to do streaming for an hour, right? I'm kind of exhausted after it, and I need to kind of sit real quiet for a little bit afterward, you know? But so here's the good things. What do I like about streaming? I love the interaction. I do love the joking around. I love the, let's be honest, I love the sort of ego hit of like, people are coming to watch me draw. How lovely is that? I love the fact that I do tend, once I start drawing, to go way faster than I would in my normal life. because I'm not like, oh, I'll check Twitter. Oh, let me see what's going on over at the New York Times. Oh, no, I'll check and see what my emails got going on, which makes a 1.5 hour cartooning session kind of balloon to 2.5 hours because I'm, time to refill my coffee. I'll be right back. Oh, let me just pet the dog for a minute. But if I'm just streaming, I get a whole cartoon done, bang, 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 because I'm performative and I want to make it clean and easy for people to jump in. And also because I'm being watched, I'm very aware that I shouldn't be checking Twitter, shouldn't be checking my email, that I should stay on task. So that's very helpful. Now let's talk about the downsides. The prep to get myself ready to stream seems to be as long, if not longer, than streaming itself. Okay, so like, let's say it takes me an hour to finish a comic in streaming, which, by the way, is record speed for Dave Kellett. I'm cranking them out when I'm streaming. Yeah. But beforehand, I got to get the cameras ready, got to get the lighting ready, got to set up the different streams, got to mention it on Twitter, on Instagram, on Instagram Live, on this, on that. I got to put it on Patreon. All the different spots to mention it, and then getting all the feed ready, getting the cameras ready. And I'm someone, Brad, who enjoys streaming just enough where I've dropped like $150 on camera mounts around my desk that I have mounted so that I can ostensibly do this quicker. And yet I still don't do it because the setup takes just enough time where it pisses me off every time. Where I've got to adjust the camera, check on the OBS streamer, adjust the camera again, check again. And you're like, for God's sakes, like I want it to be set it and forget it, where I never have. If I could just turn on the camera and go, but it's not that. It's like a 20-minute, 30-minute setup to get the streaming going. And then I find that, and this is the ego again, I only like streaming specific parts of my process. Does that make sense to you, Brad?
Yes,
does that resonate at all?
Yes, it does.
And I will be honest, it's ego. I don't want to be embarrassed by showing this or that aspect of how I create what I create. I only want to show the fun part, which is probably inking, if I'm being honest about it. Like I'm going from roughs to finish, and aren't we all having fun? And look at how great Dave is. I don't want you to see the 20 minutes where I'm futzing over the same hand because I can't get the damn thing right. That's not fun for me. I hate that. How about you?
Oh, same thing. I only live stream inking because, it's exact same thing. The setup of a panel often takes a little bit of time and takes a little bit of doing and maybe redoing, maybe starting over, starting the scene from another angle. There's any number of things that might happen that frankly, I would assume is boring. And I just don't want to show that part of my process. I for the same reason, it's ego. It's ego. Yeah. And so the few times I've done it, it was inking only, because also that's the so here's the deal. Same thing that I just got done saying. If I'm penciling, I'm silent. I cannot talk while I'm penciling because I'm completely
you actually stop
focused.
Drawing when you talk, I noticed. Yeah. When you stream,
So the inking is as close as I can get to being able to talk a little bit, draw a little bit, talk a little bit, draw a little bit. If I'm penciling, I'm 100% focused on what I'm getting accomplished. I'm using my entire brain at that point to try and make that image right, try to make sure that the word balloons are in the right place. All of that stuff takes my full concentration. So no, I can't do it any differently than that. If I'm going to live stream at all, it's got to be inking.
Yeah. And so for me, I have learned that I don't just like a camera angle on my desk. Yeah. For me, that's not, I don't know the right word to say this, but maybe sufficient. That's not sufficient for me to just have a camera on my desk. My attitude is, if I'm going to stream, they want to see the drawing and they want to see my face, or at least my body posture as I'm drawing. That's half of the fun. So I usually have a main image and then a picture-in-picture with a templated, cutout, transparent, kind of semi-transparent JPEG or GIF or whatever it might be.
It's a PNG.
PNG, yes. Yeah. Layered so that the picture-in-picture looks classy next to the main picture, right? Yeah. And then it has links to all that sort of stuff. But all that takes setup. It takes setup to get the picture-in-picture looking right and the main thing looking right. And then, God forbid, my elbow bump one of the cameras and then I feel flustered and my face goes red, so I love it. I really do love streaming, but there's a hassle to it that I wish I had enough of a permanent setup where I could walk to a desk, hit a switch, start streaming for 20 minutes. Everyone would know about it. But between the social media announcements, setting up the tech, finding the exact right moment where I'm comfortable sketching so that people don't see my cheats, my workarounds, my shortcuts that I take to create art, then I would do it all the time, but I don't. And the reason is frankly hassle.
Yeah. So I don't know that we can offer a whole lot of practical advice. I will say this: if you're going to do it, if it's a good fit for your personality, Dave has the right angle on this. You do have to think about things like good lighting. You do have to take a moment to consider camera angles and making sure that you can see what you're doing in terms of if you're doing digital art, doing a transmission from the tablet to software like OBS. I'll also say OBS takes a lot of learning curve to get that working right as well. But lighting and camera angles, you definitely need to take a little bit of time and think about those things, because that's very important to the quality that you're putting out there.
Yeah, even microphone settings in terms of having cameras too close or too far, or background music too strong, or background music being blocked because it has copyright protections on it, all sorts of things. So
I will say this. Now, let's say you're more like me and you're like, nah, that's not a good fit for me. If you use Clip Studio Paint, and you're using the most updated version, there is an automatic screen record function, and I thought it would be a memory drag. It's really not. It's kind of amazing. You can have Clip Studio do a screen recording of your entire drawing process, and output it just at the end of what you're doing. And you can have basically that you can use that as a time lapse video. If you decide you want to share your work and your process, also you can go in and edit out the parts you don't want to share. If there's a part that's just embarrassingly long, like Dave talked about, sometimes you draw a hand over and over again. You can edit it before it goes out, which I have an appreciation for. And then you can do something very similar, sharing a time-lapse video, and it's baked right into Clip Studio, which is amazing.
Yeah, here's the thing, Brad, because I want to talk about the person had asked, does this build an audience? And we didn't talk about this because, frankly, you and I haven't gotten far enough into that process with streaming yet. Yeah. But I will say this. Yes, of course, you could build an audience with this. But here's the thing. Much like Brad with his thirst trap TikToks and stuff, you might be building the wrong audience. They might be enjoying watching you draw, but they're not big on your comics themselves, right? Like you could be. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Listen, I'm a person that does a podcast with his pal, and I like the fact that people come to this, even though they might not enjoy my comics. So obviously your streaming could live somewhat separately from your comics and work in parallel. Yes, you can build an audience. The same things are always true. Regularity, schedule helps in terms of regularity of like it's always Friday at 2:00 Eastern or something like that, so that people know when to come. I know Lar D'Souza did it for a while with great regularity, and people loved it. Carl Kerschel did it for a while with great regularity. People loved it. And so you can obviously build up an audience with it. Brad and I haven't gotten there because we can't get over the basic hurdles of what's keeping us from enjoying streaming. Although, Brad, here's my second point. If I could figure out a way to have you and I on a shared stream with 4 camera streams so that you could see your face, my face, and our drawing. And we've tried this in the past. Yes. I would do that at least once a week for our Patreon folks for ComicLab. Honest to God, I would love to do an hour or two of drawing with you, because even then, for ComicLab, I would share the sort of shitty parts about my art making that I'm embarrassed about, because people would understand. They're all art makers themselves, you know? Right.
Yeah, but we tried that. The technical hurdles were absolutely frustrating, infuriating. We both got super frustrated trying to make it happen. Yeah. And maybe that's just because we've aged out of that technology. I don't know. Maybe. Although, not for nothing, we do a lot of pretty complicated stuff just making this live stream work. We can do this. I don't know why we couldn't do that, but no, I would do it as again, maybe as not open-ended. I guess the opposite is closed-ended. As a predetermined 1 or 2 hours, I would do that just for the fun of drawing with you. But again, for me, I know that it's going to have an effect on my output. And so at some point, I draw the line. It's like, okay, enough. I've got to actually get work done here. If we did it every month,
like the first Friday of every month, something that's easy to say, easy to remember.
Yeah.
That's very doable. I just can't figure out how to get the 4 streams to work together and have the audio sync up in a way that doesn't sound maddening. It drives me. So if anybody wants an original Sheldon art and can tell Brad and I how to do a 4-camera stream synced up, working great, let us know, because there's a shiny new Sheldon original flying your way. If you can let us know how to do it. It's driving me bonkers when we did try it. Anyway, so streaming, does it work? Yes. If you have the personality for it, yes. If you can actually do the work while you're drawing, which is sometimes Brad and my problem. If you don't mind being performative, if you don't mind showing warts and all, kind of thinking about how the sausage is made, then yes, streaming can be really fun. When I'm into it, I love it. I really, really love it. I love the give and take. I love the audience interaction. I hate the setup. I hate the fact that my ego only allows me to share certain aspects of what I draw. But can it be an audience builder? Yes. Might it build the wrong audience? Yes. Might it help you with your overall career? Yes. So there's a lot of yeses and a lot of maybes on this as my final result.
Absolutely. So, Dave, let's take another question here from our $5 Patreon backers. This one coming in from Dave, who says, do you have any suggestions on how to reach out to an artist whose social media gets to be more negative? How do I give them advice?
Well, this is an interesting one, because they're asking not how to tone down their own negativity, if I'm reading this right, Brad. They're asking how to reach out to an artist to
an artist to say, hey, your social media gets negative, and I want to advise you how to not do that.
Is this question asker jumping in on an intervention on my social media? Is that what's happening right now, Brad?
Yeah, I think that, Dave, I think we all are, Dave. It's time for us to talk about how absolutely nasty you're getting online. It's getting to be too much.
Yeah. All right. No, so this is an interesting one, because I have a lot of great advice in terms of toning down your own negativity. Boy, it's really hard in a digital space to tell another human being that is not a peer or a friend to tone it down, because there's no way that doesn't come across, again, in a digital space as a form of attack, if you know what I mean, Brad. In the sense that someone's going to put up their armor as soon as someone goes, hey, you don't know me, and hey, we're only interacting in a digital space, but I think you need to tone this down. Which arguably is fine. It's fine to be able to tell other human beings, like, hey, be a nicer person. God forbid you be a nicer person in this world. Right. But I'm just saying, in a digital space, when someone doesn't know you, or you're not a friend, or you're not a peer, it's really hard to tell them to change who and what they are and how they're doing their life.
I'll put it even more succinctly. They ain't looking for your advice. They're not looking for your advice. And if they're doing negative social media, and ostensibly they're getting positively reinforced for doing negative social media, right? Or else they would change. If they were doing negative social media and it was leading to bad things, they would stop it, because you stop doing bad things and you go on to doing something else. That's just behavioral modification. So ostensibly they're getting the thing they want out of it. Either it's attention or more followers or, engagement, what have you.
Reaction. Yeah, exactly.
They're not looking for your advice. And so trying to give your advice to somebody who's not looking for it is going to be an uphill battle. Now, if you've got, and by the way, this is why I would even hesitate to go into where you're talking about going. If you've got a huge career, if you can point to an enormous success, and you can say, listen, and the best way to do that is often from a standpoint of, I've made the mistake you're making, and I can tell you how it ends. Right. That those kind of arguments are convincing. Unless you have the body of work, unless you have the career, unless you have the skin in the game, that you can say, I can speak with authority on this subject, and here's what I've got to say to you. Unless you can do that, again, you're just, to this person, you're just another nobody. And who are you to be giving me advice, is the answer that you're going to get from this person who's doing negative social media. It's not a polite thing. They may be wrong about you 100%. Maybe you've got exactly the right angle on this. But the first thing they're going to say is, who the hell are you?
Right. Okay, so now let's make that even worse.
Yeah.
Instead of even who the hell are you, let's take this to a personal level. I, Dave Kellett, have been cartooning online for 20 years, right? Or 25 years, sorry, 25 years.
Yeah.
And I have a professional career that I've been going at forever. Got a wonderful assistant, got a nice business going, got a nice audience and title list going, right?
Yeah.
Ostensibly, I have, quote unquote, made it in a career. There are, Brad, 5 or 6 cartoonists that I would love to tell to tone it down. I would love to be able to say, hey, how about practicing a little bit more kindness in your life, right?
Yeah.
You know what doesn't work? I've actually tried it with a few of them. Guess what? It doesn't work. Some people in this world are just wired for anger, whether it's nature or nurture. They're just wired for anger. And nothing that I can say, even as a peer, so never mind the who the hell are you, even as a peer, and I guess I would say a respected peer, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to change who they are. I can try. I have tried. The older I get, the less I try because it's like shine it. I'm not going to change them. But in my 20s and 30s, I tried more often. But what I'm getting at is not only is it a who the hell are you, it's a I know who you are and who the hell are you. I respect you and who the hell are you to tell me who. So you can try, but I don't think you're going to change someone in a digital space. What it takes is someone in their real world. My least favorite phrase, in the meat space, someone has to tell them, it's a family friend, a loved one, a genuine peer in their physical life has to tell them. And even then it's recurring. It's probably with therapy. To say, like, you've got to have a better outlook on life. Something about you is wanting to attack the world, and it's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for the people around you.
No, you're absolutely right. And at the end of the day, listen, the question asker here, their heart is in the right place. They're trying to do the right thing. We're not taken back from that at all. But what we are saying is, you've got a lot of things. You've got a limited number of hours in this day. All right. There are many better ways for you to use your hours than something that at the end of the day is going to be an absolute waste of that time. Go take that time that you want to advise someone else on their social media and put it into your art and never think twice about making that decision. It's a much more constructive use of your time.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Okay, everybody. Well, it's time for a middle of the show update, and this one's not so fun, but it is worth talking about because language is important. A couple weeks ago, Brad and I had jokingly stumbled upon the phrase grandfathered out or grandfathered in talking about Patreon levels. And I said, hey, after the show, I'm going to look up the etymology of that. I don't know what grandfathered in or grandfathered out means.
Right.
And because we work with language, and because language is our playground, and because meanings are important and language is important, it's worth talking about this because when we know better in life, we do better. And grandfathered in, it turns out, is an old Jim Crow phrase from the racist South when they were trying to keep post-Civil War Black Americans from voting. And so they had basically a clause, a grandfather clause, that said, hey, if your grandfather had been registered to vote, even if he was illiterate, pre-Civil War, then you as a grandson could vote. And that was basically to keep Black Americans from voting. So that is what that phrase is. I am going to make an active attempt not to use that phrase anymore because I obviously don't want to have that in my day-to-day conversation. So just a good thing to update because language is important. Language matters. I did not know that. It is shitty when we stumble upon a old racist phrase. Like, for example, Brad, I had a word the other day and I was saying there was a machine in my life that I was like, oh, this machine is acting janky, and JANKY. KY. And I was like, ooh, that has the ear of a racist word. I'm going to look that up. And because I have the Oxford English Dictionary, that 20-volume set, I looked up janky. Turns out, thank God, it's not racist. It's an old Scottish word from the 17th century. Was the earliest derivation I could find. But doesn't it sound like it potentially could be racist, that word?
It's
like,
one of those words that you would like, throw up a red flag.
Yeah, so I don't like. Anyway, language is important. So it was worth talking about this just for a second, just to say, hey, I apologize for that phrase because it was unintentional. But when you know better, you do better. And so that's a phrase I wanted to learn from.
Yeah, and that's a good phrase for us to phase out of our own discourse.
See what he just did there? Yes. That's why he's the champion. That's why he's the champion. Oh boy. I tell you what, I like that. That kind of smooth, easygoing Brad Guigar. So Brad, I want to jump us into our next question here over at patreon.com/ComicLab. This comes in from Joe, and Joe writes in, I'm starting to set up an email list for my series. In the past, I've been using my own personal email. Should I set up a separate email account for just the comic? And how do you deal with it? Also, how are you enticing people to sign up? Maybe a one-shot freebie like a desktop image or a story from the future book? Brad, this question goes to email lists. First of all, how do you handle your email mailing list? Do you send from Mr. Brad Guigar at MrBradGuigar.com or your favorite email that's also yours?
Yeah. No, I do not use my personal email address. And I found out, I actually researched this a while ago, maybe a year or so back when email newsletters started to kind of get popular again. I did a piece for webcomics.com, and I found actually a lot of reasons why it's not a good idea to use your personal email address on your email newsletter. In other words, you don't want that to be the email that you send it from. Okay. You just want to use a different one. And so the top one, and actually I knew about this from the first time I wrote about email newsletters way back in the day, is that it's very easily to get identified as a spammer. Okay. And so you don't want that to happen to your personal email address, the one you use for most of your business dealings and so on and so forth. You can get identified as a spammer, and that happens when somebody gets the email newsletter and either they didn't understand that they signed up for it, maybe they don't remember signing up for it, maybe they're just a jerk and they hit the spam button, and you get your email address identified as having sent spam. If that happens often enough, different units like Gmail and all these other email providers could start to identify you as a spammer.
Well, Brad, we've just identified why no one answers my emails. So, shoot. All right, this is very good advice from my friend Brad. Okay, keep going. Yes.
When you forward on that whole page of knock jokes, nobody's responding back with who's there. They're just letting it go.
Yeah, so I have been using my personal email. This is a no. I did not think about this. Yeah,
I've got a separate email account that I use just for that that I check in on in case anybody's answering or say responding to it. But no, I don't use my personal businessy or I don't use my central email account.
And so you just set up a throwaway Gmail account or something? Is that what you did, basically?
Actually, you could do that. I set up one on evilinc.com because I like how professional that looks. This is coming from Brad at evilinc.com. That just, but like I don't use that really for anything else. I just use it for that purpose.
Yeah. Okay. Now I understand. Yeah. And since your email is different than evilinc.com.
Yeah. And I use my Gmail account for everything else, but
gotcha. But the main idea is that you don't, in case you start getting flagged as spam, you don't want your personal email getting flagged as spam.
Right. The one that I use for all my business dealings.
That is a really solid point that I never considered in all my time of using mailing lists.
But it's actually not the only reason. There's a bunch of reasons. And this is one that I never thought of before I started researching this. Many of your readers might set up email filters to automatically put newsletters in a separate folder out of the inbox. so that they can browse newsletters during free time in the evenings or weekend.
Oh, okay. So it's an unending list of the reasons so far why I'm doing this wrong. This is great. Okay, so we've got the you don't want to get blocked for spam, and also you help with the filtration on the user's end in terms of newsletters that they might want to review, like say on a Sunday, and they review all their newsletters on Sunday. Okay, I get that. Okay, what's more in the unending list of reasons why I'm doing this wrong?
Well, it depending on which one you're using, it goes back to that professionalism thing that I was talking about. Okay. In other words, if you're using, like I've got an old Yahoo email that's still, it's just around because I used it 100 years ago. If you're using that and it's coming in from, tasty toasty, whatever at yahoo.com, then it doesn't look very professional. Whereas if you're using something that's got a little bit better professional polish to it, then it just reflects better on you when it pops into their email. And by the way, they're less likely to think that it's spam, I would think, if it doesn't have some kind of weird name attached to it, right?
Yeah. Are you like me and you get a little tiny bit judgy when someone still has an AOL email account? I'm like, how old are we that we're using AOL as our email account still?
AOL? Yeah, that's that one I could. And this is coming from a guy that up until recently still had an excite.com account because it was literally the first email account I set up, and I find they literally excite.com, which it's a great story, it came on the forefront in the early 2000s because they had a central website that you could put together like the front page of a newspaper.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember this.
That, yeah.
So I got an Excite account. I had an Excite email for the longest time.
Oh, you were very excited about it. All right. Okay. Yeah, keep going.
That's the name. But yeah, and then like 2 years ago, they literally said, if you want to keep using email, you got to pay us. I forget how much it was per month or per you. And I'm like, really? I'm going to pay for an excite.com email? I'll just let it go dead. I don't care, But yeah, at some point you got to update.
So here's let's just do a quick tour of how Dave Kellett can be judgy about your emails, because this is kind of fun. So when it's an AOL account, it's always like Grandma Nuggins at AOL.com. You're always like, all right, someone's clearly over 70. They kept their AOL account. Yeah. Whenever somebody has their college alumni email, I'm like, really? Are you still that connected to your college that you gotta like? I liked my college time, but you're not gonna see me using like blah 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 alumni.com. And I'm like, come on. Yeah. And then whenever I get one from Proton Mail, I'm always like, well, the Russian FSB is reading your email. All right, well, there you go. And so like I get super judgy based on emails in the smallest way. I'm so small about it. I admit publicly that I'm so small about my judginess on people's email. But anyway.
No, I totally, believe me, I'm the same way. So I've given you a few reasons that you should not use your central email account. But let's go to that second part of the question. How can you entice somebody to sign up for your email newsletter? Now, I do need to mention at this point, we covered an awful lot of this. We did a whole show that talked about newsletters and so forth. Yep. But let's just, because this is kind of a simple one to just bang out real quick. How can you entice somebody to sign up for your newsletter?
Well, I have to say, one of the ones that I've been using lately to pretty good effect has been on social media. I have been playing up the fact that most algorithms will limit how much of me you see on Twitter and on Instagram. And for a certain type of personality and catching them at a certain time, it seems to be working. So it says like, I think my message is something like, oh no, Instagram blocks how many of my comics you see. If you want to see everything, jump on over at my comic list, my email list, blanketyblank.com. And then it sends them to a MailChimp sign up, easy peasy. Beth has made a really cute landing page, and the turnover for that has been great. So I've been using that. How about you, Brad? What have you been enticing people with lately?
What I do a lot of the same outreach that you're talking about. And also I have it set up like my standard outreach, because I found this is actually pretty effective. What I say, like I'll post the half-page comic on Twitter, and then I'll say, literally, if you don't know what's going on, then you've been missing updates. sign up to get each new comic emailed to you.
Oh, that's
and
clever.
I'll send you a free copy of the Under New Management ebook. Now, Under New Management came out a number of years ago. I've made all the sales I'm going to make on it for the most part, and it's an ebook, so it's not exactly cutting into my bottom line. So I can I have it set up that when they sign up for the newsletter, and again, I use MailChimp too. You can have it set up to, once they complete the sign up, they get either, I forget how it is, they get dropped in a page, or it just sends out a welcome email, and I have that link attached to the welcome email. Either way, once they sign up, boom, they get a link that they can download the comic. It's a I forget how many pages. It's a nice little bump that they get.
That's very clever.
It doesn't really cost me anything.
That got me thinking, because 2 of my Eisner nominated books are out of print. It would quite literally cost me nothing, to use that phrase appropriately, to give out Eisner nominated books for free as ebooks to sign up. So that's a great enticement. I'm going to use that myself. I think that's a good one.
And plus that little phrase that I'm talking about there, it's a great way of using the algorithm for you. Because literally, a lot of times they're going to look at that comic, and Evil Inc. is storyline driven. So they might look at that comic and say, hey, I don't know what's going on here. And you literally take that situation and you weaponize it for yourself. And you say, hey, if you don't know what's going on here, here's why. You're relying on social media to deliver this stuff. It ain't getting delivered. Here's how you can fix it. And I'll give you something free when you go to it. And interestingly enough, I found this when I first started this outreach. It might be time for me to select a new reward too, because I've been banging that drum for at least a year or so. It might be time to give them a new reward that maybe they might be interested in. But what I found out when I did that outreach, I had a whole flood of new people jumping in. So I'm like, oh, they must really like that reward, right? I went and checked the analytics. Less than 50% of them actually downloaded the
Oh my
reward.
God, is that true? When you offer something, people jump on it, but there's only a percentage that actually capitalize that. That's true with Kickstarters. That's true with Patreon. That's true with just basic giveaways. God, that's true. I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Yeah. It's like they like the idea of getting something free. They don't even really care about getting that thing, or maybe they're going to download it later, or who knows? Maybe they're just busy. But it was a huge incentive that a lot of them. The incentive was the idea, not so much as the actual thing. So there's lots of ways you can do this, and I'm looking at right now. The newsletter for me is just sending the comic out. At some point, I might be building that out and send some more things out there. But in the meantime, really, this is just a way for you to get another distribution stream out there that you can use, and one that, as you continue to build this over time, is going to be pretty powerful when it comes to doing things like Kickstarters and stuff, because you're going to have instant access to those people. That you can count on, and you're not going to have to worry about the algorithm and all that stuff.
And one other thing that I would just add before we close off this topic is that if you do entice someone to sign up, remember to have a pleasant and very clear sign up page that says like, hey, and by pleasant, I mean, don't make it look dubious and like it was coded in 2001. You want it to, MailChimp makes it very easy, for example, to have a modern looking, clean, pleasant landing page that says, hey, here's how you can get my emails. You can get them either once a week. You can get them every time there's a new comic. You can get them every day. You can get them once a month, however you want to set up the frequency, right? So that's one. So then people have the power of choice. You want to make it clear that you're not going to sell or use or pass along. I always make the joke like, hey, I'm a cartoonist. I'm not Citibank. I'm not going to sell your email. I'm just trying to give you my comics. And then make a nice, clear unsubscribe, always possible within your email list. Per Brad's point earlier, systems like Gmail have auto ways to report either spam or an inability to unsubscribe. And so if you don't offer it, it actually will ping you in the long run to some of these bigger mail servers that will no longer honor you as sort of A-class email, right? You'll get downgraded basically. So you always want to make it possible to unsubscribe, make it pleasant and easy to subscribe, and make it clear that you are not passing along or selling your email. And for God's sakes, don't pass along and sell the emails. That's the shittiest thing. You're a cartoonist. Don't do that. But good luck with it. I think this can work for you, Joe. So good luck with it.
Absolutely. So, Dave, we've got another question that we can tackle, and this is going to be an interesting one. I've read this already, and I think it's going to be fun. Coming in from our $5 Patreon backer, Alexi, who says, "Hey, Brad and Dave. So I've always had difficulty with words and writing because of my dyslexia. I found myself being drawn to visual gags, pun intended. Sometimes they add to the strip. Sometimes they are for fun. For example, using a bear trap instead of a mouse trap, or a dog putting on a pair of glasses before saying something smart, or something like that. Can you talk about using visual gags in your humor? How can it take away or add to your comic? Thanks for all your guidance and support."
Well, this is a fun question. The visual gag is interesting because it's most often associated, I would think, with for the same reasons that dyslexia might kick in, with developing readers for whom wordplay, written wordplay, is trickier. So you very often see it in like Dog Man and that kind of book, where a physical, clear joke is a fun one to see. So you also see it in Warner Brothers cartoons, that kind of stuff. But I think for the average comic, personally, I think they're best used as sort of a tertiary read in the comic. It's like you've already enjoyed the big swing, and then the physical joke is sort of in the background. It's a small mouse doing something, or it's something akin to that. It's a tertiary read. It's not the primary or secondary read. Right. But again, I should mention that that's just subjective. There are people that love visual humor and love that is the main driver of a comic strip. It's kind of like, again, the subjective of why I don't like wordless comics that we talked about a few weeks ago. Again, a total subjective. So don't judge it based on how Dave Kellett feels about it. First of all, if you're loving it, if that's working for you, then man, go with it, run with it. That's great. For me, it's not my primary motivation as a reader in comics. Brad, how about you?
I think you're on the right track. In other words, I think this is something that can be a nice addition. It can be a nice spice. It can be a seasoning. But it's going to be really hard to build that as a gag to your comic. In other words, to let that be the punchline. And in other words, we talk about Easter eggs all the time.
Yeah, I guess that's the way I was thinking of in tertiary, kind of Easter egg. Yeah.
And there's cartoonists in comics history like Basil Wolverton, who was one of those original Mad magazine artists, who was really known for just cramming all kinds of stuff into the backgrounds of his comics. There was tons of stuff that you'd have to read his comics 2 and 3 times over just to really understand what's going on.
So let me talk for a second about Sergio Aragonés, who I think was one of the masters of physical comedy. And it's interesting that he also had sort of a language barrier when he first came to the U.S., to New York, to start working with Mad Magazine. And so it's not an accident that a lot of his humor was physical-based humor and visual gags. And the thing with Sergio is his artwork is inarguably some of the best in comics history. He's so good, so good. And he's made it work because I think he had to be forced down at first in the first decades of him being in New York, the first decades where he was mastering English. It kind of forced him down that path, but he got better and better and better at it. And he's inarguably one of the best in the world in terms of slapstick, visual, whatever you want to describe it as. And his clarity of line, his especially with diminution, it's so small in his marginalia, and it works. It works. I loved and still love Sergio. So now I'm actually course correcting because I'm remembering that I do actually really love Sergio. So maybe it's just my subjective take is that it all depends on how you execute it.
Yeah.
I loved the way Sergio did it. I love the way he does it now. Gru continues to have that incredible physical, visual humor. So maybe I'm I'm changing my opinion based on me remembering that Sergio exists. Maybe that's what's happening right now.
Maybe. Well, listen. So let's take this as a side topic for a second, and I'm putting you on the spot, and I think you already know how I feel about it. We had two examples in that question about visual gags.
Right.
Did either of those seem very funny to you?
Oh, you mean like the dog putting on glasses and stuff? Yeah. I mean, it maybe in context, not particularly in the way it was described, but maybe in context it would be. But yes, I'm taking your point that it's not it's not like slapstick hilarious. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And I think we need to talk about this. This came up in the ComicLab Discord server just a while ago. Somebody had posted a 4-panel comic that they had written, and they were looking for some help with the punchline. Right. And it turned into this amazing conversation about the difference between a non sequitur and a punchline or a joke, right? Because a lot of times when people are struggling with humor writing, what happens is they write a non sequitur and they think that that's the same as writing a punchline. And the fact of the matter is, a non sequitur can be funny, but a non sequitur is not funny automatically. Right. Okay? Yeah. It is not an immediate causality towards humor is to have a non sequitur. Yeah. And so I'm going to so here's the example. And I got this person's permission to post about this on webcomics.com. So I'm going to talk about the comic as an offshoot of that. I won't name them because I don't want them to feel embarrassed, but it's such a perfect example. The example was like a standard Frankenstein setup. You know, the mad scientist is saying it's a success. It's a success. This creature is going to have amazing strength. And as the creature goes out, bursts through the castle doors, he calls out to his monster, I want you to go out there and conquer. I want you to conquer. In the next panel, the Frankenstein monster is swinging a baseball bat. There's an announcer saying it's going, gone. It's another home run. And in the final panel, the two mad scientists are sitting in the stands with popcorn and beer watching the baseball game. And one says to the other, I guess it's not the way I thought he would conquer the world, but at least he's doing something. Right? It's something like that. Right. I see. Yeah. So what I said was, you didn't write a joke. You wrote a non sequitur. And you got to understand the difference between the two if you're going to write humor, because non sequiturs are not automatically funny. And I said, deep down, and this is something that I look for in my own work too. Like when you know deep down it's not funny, he committed the ultimate tell in his last panel. He explained the joke. Right. That last panel is not a punchline. It's explaining the joke. And that's when I find myself explaining my jokes in my comics, I know that I really didn't write anything funny. I needed to go back to the drawing board on that one. So I said, so here's why it's not, or more to the point, how do you make a non sequitur funny? Well, more often than not, it's going to be irony that you're going to use. You've got other tools too, like hyperbole and repetition, stuff like that. But more often than not, it's going to be irony. So, okay. What do you mean by that? That's interesting. How do you add irony to this example? Well, here's what we do. The problem is this non sequitur does have no irony. It's got nothing for irony because you're sending that Frankenstein monster. You're imbuing him with great strength. That was a big part of your setup. You're imbuing him with great strength, and he goes out into a situation in which he uses great strength to succeed. There's no irony there. In fact, it's perfectly logical. It's rational. You would expect a super strong Frankenstein monster to excel in baseball because he's super strong. You gave us zero irony. You gave us a very rational ending to that whole thing. Now, let's introduce irony. Instead of sending the Frankenstein monster out into baseball, let's send him out to the Great British Bake Off.
something in which his strength has absolutely no bearing on his success, right? So now automatically you've got a great visual. You've got a nice horizontal panel where the Frankenstein monster is standing in the middle, towering over all of these smaller, diminutive, fussy British types, right? They're all displaying their cakes. His cake, of course, is the tallest, the most fussiest confection delicacy of pastry in the whole thing. He's won first prize. That automatically is a much funnier visual. And since you've gotten to the funny with the visual, or at least you're going down the right lane.
Right, because you could have a little doily apron, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, you could have little side visuals. Yeah, that tertiary reads, as we were talking about before, that aid to the joke. Yeah.
So now that you're going towards the funny, that last punchline doesn't have to explain the joke. It can actually make something funny happen. For example, the thing that I brainstormed was off to the side, there's a little old lady. She's arguing with one of the judges. And the judge, he's got a judge rule book, of course. He says, there's nothing in the rule book that says anything about using an old family recipe. And she says, I didn't say he used one. I said he is one. Right?
Okay. Yes, yes.
Now you've got
or
a
you could say,
punchline.
I didn't say he used one. I said he cooked with my family.
He turned my family into ingredients. So now you can start, and again, that's where, and on Writer's Room, we do this all the time. You can take that now and push it and push it and push it.
Right.
You had to understand in that first swing that you didn't write a joke. What you wrote was a non sequitur. And non sequiturs are not automatically funny. If you go through 90% of Pro-Am webcomics who are trying to do humor, you can see this at play all the time. They think that since they wrote something that was illogical, that it is funny. Well, illogical is often funny, but it can't be just illogic on its own. It's got to be illogic with a twist. And that twist, I'm going to tell you, 9 chances out of 10 is irony.
Yeah, it often reads as clever, but not funny in terms of being a non sequitur. And if you want to see this in action, I can advise you to look through probably the first 5 to 10 years of Sheldon. You'll see it very often, where a non sequitur is standing in place of a punchline or a successful conclusion to a comic. So I am not immune to this criticism myself. I have done this and maybe occasionally still do from time to time, because sometimes we also think that the insight that we bring from a non sequitur, that the cleverness of that is enough to carry it. Well, maybe it is within your brain, but not within a wider readership of for which a punchline would serve better. So, Brad, that's a really good distinction. I don't know that I've ever thought about that.
The whole thing that brought that up in my mind was just the idea that like neither one of those two ideas, they were both non sequitur visuals, right?
Right.
In other words, how do you add irony? The first thing that came to mind, the mousetrap, instead of using a bear trap. Why not? You remember the mousetrap board game that had distinctive things that came up? Putting that in front of a mouse hole, that's got more irony than the bear trap. In other words, if you're going to introduce this stuff, if you're going to work in humor, you've got to take a minute to really study how humor works. And really push those concepts, because otherwise what happens is, if you don't understand, you've got a bear trap in front of a mouse hole, and the reaction your reader's going to have is either he drew the wrong trap or what the hell's going on here? Right. You're adding more confusion. Right. That's why it's got to be, you've got to have a purpose. You've got to have an irony that works in a certain way to make that non sequitur hit.
I'm always pleasantly surprised when you find a new way of looking at joke construction that I had never considered before. I had not put thought to the differentiation between non sequitur and punchline as something that A, exists, and B, that I have absolutely done.
How do you think we know this stuff? It's because we screwed it up so often. We learned from our mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was just about to say, is that's how we got better, is by making this mistake hundreds of times. So this is not, by the way, this is not Brad and I judging anybody when we say something like this, because we have and continue to do these same things every once in a while, and it's worthwhile to give notice to it, because it helps us all get better. And so, to Brad's earlier point, one thing I just want to reinforce is, Sometimes we fall into this trap because non sequiturs sometimes do read as a punchline. Sometimes.
Yes.
Sometimes they do. But there's not a direct causality from non sequitur to humor.
Right.
Sometimes it's just wry smile. Sometimes it's just, clever insight. I'm talking about reader reaction. So it's not always humor. It's not always a laugh. Sometimes it's just, okay, well, that, but the problem is, 2 times out of 10, it'll hit as humor.
Yeah.
Undeniably, it'll hit as humor. And that's just enough for you to go, oh, well, that's a trick I can use again. Well, it doesn't always work. 8 times out of 10, it doesn't. So anyway, I think that's a really good point, Brad.
Yeah, it's definitely not a trap that you want to fall into. And like you said, Dave, this is a trap that we both fell into time and time and time again. And it's just like the person listening at home fell into the trap of listening to this podcast one more time. It's a trap that you fell into again. And we hope that you fall into it again next week when we say that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
And just a reminder that this entire 4-year show has been a con to make you trapped into being our friends. Your hosts have been my friend, Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend, the wonderful Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions, who is trapped in here with us, much like Rorschach said in The Good Old Watchmen. You're not trapped in here with me. Wait a minute, I messed it up. I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me. Matt, you're trapped in here with us. He's over at www.woodsong.media. God, I mangled that so bad.
By the way, I love that character in The Watchmen. I just didn't understand why they always drew a picture of my dad hitting me on his face.
What? What was that joke?
It's a Rorschach
test. I know, but why did you use a dad hitting you? That's
well, because that's what I see in my Rorschach test.
God, that got weird and dark. I don't like that. If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. I don't want to be here anymore, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that like my therapist.
Patreon.com/
I think our time is just about up. Patreon.com/ComicLab.
And just a reminder, if you've ever gotten an email from Dave at davekellett.com, it went right to your junk mail, as we've learned from this week's episode.
Oh, gosh, now I got to check my spam folder and find out how much stuff from you I've been missing.
Although in your case, Brad, that's not going to spam. That's the delete button. That's a different thing that you're doing.
That's going to trash. Yeah, well, that'll happen.